Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So in today's video, we're going to be learning how to make this corset tube top with basque waistline effect. The pattern drafting is already up on my channel. I'll be putting the link in my description box, so do well to check it out if you haven't, and let's get started. We were playing with fire. Okay, so this is the fabric I'm going to be working with, and as you can see, it's folded into two already. And so the next thing I'll do is to get my front pattern paper, which I already drafted out, and I'm going to place it, making sure that this point is meeting this folded part right here. And after doing that, I'm going to make use of my pin to pin it up on this point and this other end as well, so that it's not going to move while I try to work with it. So guys, at this point, I'm just going to cut out what I have on my pattern paper on my fabric, and on this point right here, I'm going to be adding my seam allowance, because while I was drafting out the pattern, I didn't add seam allowance on this point right here. So I'm just adding about half of an inch on this point, and that is it for my seam allowance. And this other point right here, I'm going to be cutting out exactly what I have on my pattern paper. We aim to fly higher. We got lost and dragged each other down. So after cutting my front piece, this is what it looks like. And so I kind of realized that this point right here was a bit bigger than what I was supposed to work with. So I had to fold it back, and I had to take out 1 inch extra. So this is just me cutting out my 1 inch out of this point, so that it's going to give that basque effect. So this is what I have after taking out 1 inch, and I'm already okay working with this. So next thing I want to know is to start cutting out my back piece. And so to do that, I'm just going to place my pattern paper on the fabric as well, just like the way we did in front for the front piece, and I'm just going to cut it all out. We aim to fly higher. We got lost and dragged each other down. We kept running. So on this top part of my back, I'm just going to give it a notch, so that I'm going to be able to identify the top from the bottom. So the next thing I want to do now is to just cut out my lining piece. I'm going to be cutting out lining piece for both the front and the back. And this part right here is where we're going to be having our loop. So that is it for the front and the back pattern. So now I'm done cutting out my lining piece. I had to do it off camera, and the next thing I want to do is to iron my interface. This is ST, so I'm going to be ironing my interface on my lining piece as well as my actual fabric that I'm working with. So now I'm done ironing my interface on my main fabric and my lining piece, and you can see it looks very neat. And so the next thing I want to do now is to start working on my front piece. And to do that, I'm going to make use of my bias to make casing for my boning. So I'm just going to be making use of my ruler and my chalk to draw lines where I want my bias to stay. So this is just me marking a line on the center part of the fabric. And you can actually just do you can actually just be creative with this. You can just draw what you want on your front piece, how you want your bias casing to be. So now that I'm done, I hope you can see the lines. I have about 5 of them on this front piece. And so now I'm just going to set this aside. So I'm going to be working on the back piece, and the back piece is quite small. So I'm just going to be working with just 2 lines on the back piece, just like this. So the distance from this one to this other one is about 3 inches. You can actually work with 3.5 or 2.5, depending on how small or big your back piece is. Okay, so I'm going to get my bias now, place it on the points where I marked those lines, and I would go over to my sewing machine, and then I'll just stitch it up on both sides and do the same for all the lines where I marked for my bone casing. And so now that I'm done with it, this is what it looks like. You can see it looks very neat. And so I'm just going to place the back piece aside, and this is the boning I'm going to be working with. They call this non-sewable boning. So this is the boning I'm going to be working with. Okay, so I'm just placing my boning on the fabric, making sure that it's going to fit in perfectly. And so I'll use my lighter to burn up the top part and the bottom part. This is because I don't want it to tear the bone casing, and it doesn't make the person wearing the dress uncomfortable. So after making use of my lighter to burn it up, I'm just going to insert it through the bone case which I already made on the fabric. So guys, I'm also going to do the same thing for this other bone case, and that is what I'm going to do till I'm done passing my boning throughout the bone case which I made on my fabric. So I'm done passing my boning through my bone casing, and this is what it looks like. And the back as well, or rather the inside part of the front piece, you can see what it looks like. I went ahead to iron it up, and so I'm just going to place my back piece aside since I just want to start working on my front piece alone for now. So I'll get my back up, and then I'm going to place it right here, and I'll go over to my sewing machine and I'll stitch it up on this side, making use of half of an inch allowance. And so after doing that, now I'll place this aside as well and start working on my lining piece. I'm also going to be stitching this up, making use of half of an inch, and that is it for the front piece. Okay, so this is what it looks like after attaching my back up to the front piece. You can see it looks very neat, and I'm super excited about this and how we've gone so far. And so the next thing I want to know is to get my lining piece, and I would place the lining piece on the actual fabric, making sure that the front part of the lining is facing the front part of the actual fabric. And once I've done that, I'm just going to go over to my sewing machine, and then I'll place this up together, and I would go over to my sewing machine, and then I'll stitch it up on this point, making use of half of an inch. And so this is what it looks like after I was done stitching. So I'm just making use of my scissors to give it notch on this point so that it's going to relax. I am carefully going to notch it so that your thread is not going to cut. Okay, so now I'm turning it to the right side. I'm just going to flip it over, and as you can see, it's relaxed. So the next thing I want to now is to make use of my hemming gum. I'm going to be pinning it up on this point because I want to iron it and I want to make sure that it's relaxed properly. So that is the essence of making use of the hemming gum. So while I'm fixing my hemming gum there, I'm just going to make use of my pin to pin it all up to the end of this brack up, and yeah, so that is it. So I'm actually done ironing it, and this is what it looks like. Trust me guys, it looks very neat even in real life. So the next thing I want to do now is to flip this over back to the wrong side carefully so you don't spoil what you already ironed. And I'm going to go over to my sewing machine, and then on this point right here I'll stitch it up, making use of half of an inch. This is what it looks like after folding it up, and so I'm just going to place this aside, and I'm going to be working on the back piece. And so the back piece, I already placed my lining under it, and this is the rope I'm going to be using for my loop. I folded my bias, and so I'm just going to be cutting out my loop that I'm going to be using for the back piece. I actually don't have a measurement for this, but you're just going to fold the loop to a point where you're sure that the rope can pass through it, and so you're just going to do the same until you've gotten the amount of loop that is going to be able to fit in for the both sides of the back. So now as you can see, I folded my loop already, and I'm placing it on this back part, and I'm making use of my pin to pin it up, and the distance from one loop to another is about 1.5 inch. So when I've placed my loop, I'm just going to mark out 1.5 inch all the way down to the end of this first back piece, and after doing that I'll also do the same for the other back piece, and that's it. So at this point I'm just placing my loop on this part of the back piece, and I'll place my lining on it so that I'll go over to my sewing machine, and then I'm just going to stitch it up on this side here. I'll stitch it up on this point, stitch it up on this top part as well, and on this bottom part. And so on the part where you have your loop, you're going to double stitch so that it's going to be very tight and doesn't pull out when you're going to be tying it. So this is what it looks like. The back piece looks like after I attach my loop to it, and as you can see I ironed it well. It looks very neat already. So the next thing I want to do now is to get my front piece. I'll place it on my table like this, and then I'll get my back piece. I'll place it on my front piece, right side facing each other, and I'll do the same for the other side as well. And it's time to shape it up. Remember when we were drafting this pattern, we made use of 1 inch for seam allowance. So I'll just go back to my sewing machine, and then I'll stitch it up, making use of 1 inch as my seam allowance. So now that I'm done shaping, this is what it looks like. It looks very beautiful already, and we're almost done with this tube top. So I'm just going to set it aside, and it's time to cut out the sleeve. So for this sleeve, it's actually depending on you. If you want to work with a puffy sleeve, something puffier than what I'm going to be working with, it's actually depending on you. So I folded my fabric into two, and as you can see, I have 22 as the width, and the length I'm going to be working with is 11 inches. So I'm just going to mark out 11 inches, and then I'll cut it out. So if you're working with something puffier, you can actually work with 13 to 15 inches depending on you. So you're just going to fold this lower part of your sleeve, fold it twice so that it's going to be neat, and then fold the top part as well. And so you're going to cut out another one like this because we're actually working with two sleeves. And so now that I'm done folding the top and the bottom part of my sleeve, this is what it looks like. So I'm just going to pass my elastic through this space where I folded, and I'm going to make use of this safety pin, and that is it. Okay, so I'm just going to be passing my elastic round these holes, and as for measurements, I'm not taking my measurements. I'm just going to pass the elastic, and so when I've gotten to the point where I feel like the elastic is firm enough, I'm just going to stop there, and that is it for the sleeve. So you're just going to pass your elastic on the top part and on the bottom part, and do the same for the second sleeve as well. So guys, I'm done passing my elastic through my sleeve, and this is what it looks like. I went ahead to close up the other end, and so the next thing I want to do now is to attach my sleeve to my corset tube top. I love how this sleeve turned out, and so what I'm just going to do is to place my sleeve on this tube top part here, the part where we have our joining. I'm just going to place it on this armhole here, and then I'll go over to my sewing machine, and then I'll stitch it up on this part, and I'll do the same for the second sleeve as well. So guys, basically I've come to the end of this tutorial video. I hope you found this video very useful and helpful, and thank you so much guys for watching, and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye. Realizing it was